that this country is tested to death. No country outside the United States that is an advanced industrial, whatever, postmodern, post-industrial country tests anywhere near like the United States does. The typical country tests 3 times, basically, elementary, middle, and high school. Go all the way across Europe, look at Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea. That's what they test. In terms of large-scale standardized testing. Not one of those countries uses those tests to judge teachers or to judge their schools that I know of. Finland, highly rated on the PISA test as one of the best educational systems in the world, doesn't administer standardized tests at all, except for college admissions, and it's test optional. You can get into college without them. So, the fact of the matter is that the United States is isolated in a testing mania. And No Child Left Behind, in particular, produced a mania that has led to benchmark testing, mini, micro, formative, or I call them fake formative because they're all multiple choice, machine-administered, centrally controlled little tests that have nothing necessarily to do with the enacted curriculum in a school, down to what they call the Milwaukee probes, 2-3 questions administered several times a week on a computer, and they monitor the teachers through it. So you have this centralized, top-down system whose purpose seems to be raise scores on multiple choice tests. Yeah, some of the tests have some written responses. Massachusetts, my colleague, her eldest son wrote for multiple purposes in school. He's gone to Bard College and he's well prepared. Her youngest son writes nothing but the 5-paragraph essay. Same upper middle class school system. So it's even affecting them. Frankly, the testing mania is destroying our school system in the name of improving our school system. If you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, another standardized test, what you find is that since No Child Left Behind was passed into law, the scores on that test, the rate of improvement has declined. In some subjects it is completely stagnant now. 12th grade remains stagnant. 8th grade is stagnating in some subjects. For almost every group, demographic group that is measured in both subjects in both grades, for which you get these demographic groups. That in essence, the testing mania doesn't even show up as higher test scores on independent tests. The SAT and ACT scores have also been largely stagnant at a rate that cannot be explained by the increase in the number of those test takers. So that's the data, that the system is, I talked last night, people talked about the narrowing of the curriculum. It's happening all over the place. It can be in substantial part attributed to the incessant drive to raise the scores in math and reading. And it's depriving our children of a high-quality education. And quite frankly, systems need to change their assessment regimes. Reduce the amount of testing and change the nature of assessments so that we have true multiple measures. While we're on multiple measures, I noticed that the Illinois Multiple Measures Index, if you look at elementary school, I have it, you may not yet, out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas, exactly 1 is not based on a test score. 4 of them are based on the exact same test, and the other test is for students who are learning English. It's entirely based on tests that are, as far as I know, almost entirely, if not entirely, multiple choice tests. And I know these tests, the Explore and the Plan and whatnot, are all forerunners to the ACT. For them, a writing sample is optional. The rest of it is all multiple choice. The ACT predicts roughly, as does the SAT, 16% of the variance in college grades. It's a predictor. It's pretty minor. Why is it minor? Because it only assesses a small slice of what our kids need to know and be able to do to be successful. The group Achieve, which is hardly an anti-testing organization or a testing reform organization, they're gung-ho for tests. They did a survey, now close to a decade ago. It's buried on their website under student survey. But the point I want to talk about is they also surveyed college professors of first-year students. And what they asked was, what do your students need to know to be able to be successful in college, right? That's the new mantra, successful in college. What do they need to know? Well, be able to apply math to ill-structured problems. Whoops, that's not on the standardized test. Be able to do research papers. Whoops, that's not on the standardized test. Oral presentation, not on the standardized test. Read extended passages and be able to think critically and in-depth about them, not on the standardized test. Almost everything they wanted is not measured by our standardized test. Never mind persistence, willingness to work hard, creativity, there is an inverse correlation between creativity and standardized test scores. You know, we are, as other psychological experts have put it, designing a system to stamp creativity out of our schools and out of the minds of our children. Amen. It is not producing kids who will be successful in college. When I talk to college professors at people like MIT, they say, we're getting students who don't know how to ask questions, and not only that, don't want to ask questions. A program that focuses on all of these tests. In high school, the high school one's a little better. Graduation rates, that's very important. I have no problem with it. School ratings of excellence, taking honors and courses or receiving industry credentials, that's some good evidence. But here's the problem. All the direct evidence of student learning is these standardized tests. We are unwilling to look at any other indicators, direct indicators of student learning. Now, what would be a good direct indicator of student learning? Well, the New York Performance Standards Consortium, it's now over 30 schools in New York State. They have a variance, as they call it, they're all high schools, most of them in New York City. They have a variance from the state. It originated pre-NCLB and with the Progressive Education Commission. He gave them this variance to allow them to use their own assessments, performance tasks that they have designed and used. They're designed by the teachers in the schools. They are vetted independently for validity, reliability. They're used across these schools in conjunction with a lot of performance-based evidence from the schools themselves to make decisions about students, and that serves as the evidence under No Child Left Behind. Former Commissioner Rick Mills in New York wanted to kill it. There was a big political fight over it. They won, and this program remains and has now been given authority by the regions to expand the number of participating schools. I was recently privy to data. These schools in New York City enroll the same or a larger percentage of poor kids, more English language learners, more students with disability, and more kids of color than the New York City average. They graduate twice the number of students with disabilities as New York City. 50% again the number of English language learners. Their graduation, 4-year and 5-year graduation rates are over 90%. Almost all their graduates go to college. They track them in college, and they're finding that the substantial majority of their graduates who went to college remain in college 3 years into it, which means they're on track and almost certain to graduate, as opposed to a national graduation rate of 50% and rates for poor kids and kids of color that are dramatically lower than that. This is a system that has to take one of the state standardized tests, the English language test, and does 0 test prep for it. But they get higher scores on that test, in fact, than the city averages. So they have designed a system that you take the evidence that is done across these schools and have methods called moderation of looking at and comparing the results and making sure that they're not inflated scores from the kids' own teachers. There are other ones. You can go to the Fair Test website, search on our website for the learning record. It's a marvelous system for tracking the learning of kids. It was actually designed in London for use with the immigrant population in London, so it's built with multilingual children in mind. It is a system that relies entirely on the evidence collected by teachers in the classroom. It's been independently research verified that the inter-rater reliability of entirely separate readers of these folders of kids' work that is very carefully organized ranges from typically high 70s to 90%. It's an extremely reliable instrument. Its validity is it looks at the actual kids' work and the teacher comments and analysis of that work and the teacher observation. It's got a modest, which is what you want, correlation with standardized tests, because you are measuring some of the same things, there's some of the same rank ordering, but this is a much, much richer system. All of these systems require really changing what schools look like. Teachers have to work closely and collaborate together and learn from each other. It's a lot of professional development involved in such a system. What we've done in this country is abjure serious professional development in favor of either drive-by professional development when we do it, or more significantly, a standardized testing regime. So when teachers finally begin to collaborate, what they do, they're in the data war room, looking at test score data after test score data after test score data, from one after another to the next one, and not looking at actual kids' work often. But good high-quality professional learning, teachers look at what other teachers are doing, what they're teaching, what their expectations are, and what the kids are actually doing from work. And they critique each other and help each other. There's a marvelous book written by Chris Gallagher, It's about Nebraska, which did for a time, until the feds helped kill it, a teacher-led statewide assessment system. These were all locally based assessments developed by the teachers. They were found in numerous studies to be reliable and valid. They were rooted in the local curriculum, but the state standards. The correlations were there with the state tests, that they did a limited amount of, 3 grades, norm reference testing as a check on it, and a statewide writing sample. But the stuff that counted came out of the classroom. And what I was impressed with when I went out there is that the teachers were beginning to get into performance tasks and were learning rapidly. How and why were they learning rapidly? What Chris Gallagher shows in school after school across the state, the teachers got together and worked together and learned from each other. And the best chapter in that book, from my perspective, was a detailed description of how that happened. There's a very good detailed description of working on an Indian reservation with extreme poverty and high alcoholism, and the kind of things they were doing through that process to improve the quality of instruction. The learning record I mentioned was being widely used in Bureau of Indian Affairs schools across the country, really, across the western part of the U.S., until NCLB was killed it and the Bush administration disallowed the use of it and required the use of the standardized test. So what I'm getting at is, one last point, this is what Finland does. Finland leaves it up to the teachers. This is by and large what Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, all these places with high test scores, ironically, but high graduation rates, are places, they don't do everything the same, but they rely on high quality teaching and significant teacher autonomy exerted at the school level and with schools collaborating with each other. That's got to be the fundamental part, and that is critical to what the CTU called for this morning. CPS, and I'll say this to you because you're from CPS, you need to go down that road. You are never going to get high quality educational outcomes where the kids will succeed in college or jobs that pay well that are actually interesting to the people doing them for the most part, unless you go down a very different road than the testing road that CPS, along with all the other cities in this country, including my own of Boston, are now going down, and all the states. And they're jumping over each other, my final point, they're jumping over each other now to take the waivers from Arnie Duncan. And what Arnie Duncan should do is go, AYP is crazy, it's destroying our schools, you don't have to do it anymore. No sanctions anymore. He could have done that. It's written right there in the law. In fact, he is saying, except he's made a deal that is constitutionally questionable, we might say. What that deal says is, among other things, you have to build a statewide assessment of teachers that relies in significant part on student standardized test scores. The same old tests that are destroying public education. Now you're supposed to use them in significant part. What's happening in Tennessee? In Tennessee, it counts for 50% of the score of teachers. Well, because they only test language arts and math. Well, what do you do for the shop teacher, the art teacher, the science teacher, the history teacher? You get to pick what grade and what subject will stand in for you. So I'm 5th grade, I'm a history teacher. Do I want to pick the math teacher in the 5th grade or the English teacher in the 6th grade to have per kid scores in that subject be 50% of my evaluation? That's what they're doing. Now, in Massachusetts, we're not going to do that. Instead, we've said, oh, to the districts, which are all broke, you have to have tests in every subject, not tests, assessments, in every subject, every grade, so that you can assess every kid and then be able to assess every teacher. And we, the state, aren't giving you a nickel to do it. The feds aren't giving the states a nickel to do it. High-quality professional evaluation is, I suspect, very important, although there's basically no real evidence indicating what it leads to. We don't know yet. So instead of pilot projects to find out what would work and how it would work and why it would work, we're getting orders from Arnie Duncan that any state that wants to participate goes down that road, and hence back to the Illinois multiple measures indexes of the kind of things that are going to be used to judge teachers. Thank you.